Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. All right, Javosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Stephen Terizin, for dedicating all of his Sherman Droshos this month with gratitude to Hashem as they welcome their fifth grandchild, Gabriel Amichai Zin, and Le'ilu Nishma, Steve's mother, Dvorah Basra Bistral Yoel Zichron Livracha. Shani and Avram Kelman for dedicating all the Sherman Droshos this month, creation of the Yarzeit of Avram's father, Rafa'al Yechiel ben Avram Zichron Livracha. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld, Le'ili Nishmas Yitzchak ben Zechariah. Julie's uncle, Dr. Itzi Gelman, who was niftar on this past Shabbos. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, our hostages will be returned speedily, and our soldiers will be successful. B'chol ma'aseh yedehem. But with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Vav. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Hey Amud Beis 5b. Ibayluhu. So we'll say two lines up from the bottom. So a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, some really great Gemara. So Ibayluhu. So if you remember again, just to reorient ourselves for a moment. Remember in yesterday's daf, we had a very interesting machlokes about whether or not people pay back their debts early. That was fundamental machlokes. So Reish Lakish says, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The person does not pay their debt back early. And Rabbi Abai and Rava says, yes, they do. Now remember again, both say, so the idea over here is that Reish Lakish is saying that if a person makes a claim that they paid their debt back early, they are not believed. They're not believed. There's no credibility to such a claim like this. Whereas Abai and Ravan say, yes, there is. Okay, so now the Gemara kind of piggybacks on that a little bit and says as follows: Ibayluhu. So we ask the following shaila. Following shaila. So the Gemara says, Tavu la'achar zman va'amar lo praticha b'toch zmani mahu. So listen to this. I lend Reuven $1,000. I lend it to him for a year. It happens to be the due date of the debt is the 25th of Sivan, which was yesterday. Okay, so now I don't end up coming to Reuven until, I don't know, the Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. So I myself am late in being tovei and claiming the debt. So I come to Reuven. Reuven says, I paid you already. I paid you already. Remember again, this is after the due date. I paid you already. Not only did I pay you already, I paid you early. So we'll say, so now the question is, Mahu, what's the halacha? And I both say, now understand something interesting. So there's a chazaka. What's the chazaka over here? Chazaka is people pay their debts. That's chazaka. People pay their debts. And therefore, again, we'll say, obviously, again, we're talking about a case where there's no shtar. We're talking about a case where there's no edus. Because obviously, if there's a shtar, different things like that, if the lender is still holding the shtar, then obviously the debt hasn't been repaid. But in this case over here, we could say on one hand, there's chazaka that Reuven paid back his debt on time. So since Reuven has that chazaka, there'd be no reason for him to lie. So the fact that he's saying, I paid you early, we should believe him in this kind of case. Why? Because since it's a chazaka, mali l'shaker, why should he lie? He doesn't have, all he has to say is, I paid you back, and that's all. That's his chazaka. When he says, I paid you back early, perhaps, again, we should believe that because he already has the chazaka to support him. Okay, so the Gemara says, so va'amar lo parati ma'u mi'amrina b'makom chazaka amrina ma'al l'shaker top of Vav 6a odilma b'makom chazaka lo amrina ma'al l'shaker, or maybe not. Both say, maybe even in a case where there's a chazaka, the chazaka being that he paid back his debt, still when a person makes a claim that we know to be false, for example, in this case where he's claiming that he paid back early, and we know people don't pay back their debts early, perhaps again we should not believe him. Look at Rashi, top Rashi 6a, O Dilma, Kevan de Muchsak Lon, De'in Adam Poreh B'Soch Zmano. Since we know that people don't pay back their debts early, Lo Amrina B'Makom Di'ika Chazaka, De'mari L'Dibure, Mali L'Shaker, V'lem Ninu. So the Gemara says, so halacha l'maisa, so the Gemara says, so this is a shaila. Two sides. So the two sides of the coin. So essentially, again, we have two competing things over here. First of all, all right. So first of all, just take a quick look at Rashi. Look at two Rashis. Look at the last Rashi on Amud Beis just for a second. Mali the Shaker. Ibay Amrali Praticha Bizmani. He could have just said. Remember, Reuven could have just said, I paid back at the appointed time on the 25th of Sivan. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, when he goes there and he says, I paid back already, right, or I paid back early, he should be believed with a shvuah. Odil matap Rashi and Bava medalif kevan de muchsak lan de'in adam poreh b'sochs mano. Since we know the chazaka is that a person does not pay back their debt early, lo amrinon b'makom diika chazaka demari ledibure mali l'shaker v'lemninu. So we'll say, so these are the two sides of the coin. So do we say, so you see here, there's two competing things over here. On one hand, a chazaka that a person pays back their debt on time. On the other hand, this other chazaka, so to speak, that people do not pay back their debts early. So therefore, in this kind of case, where Reuven could have simply said, I paid you back on time, but instead he claims, I paid you back early, what do we do with this? So let's go back to Bava. So this is the Shaila. So Tashma, let's analyze. So Gemara quotes from the Mishnah. Suppose remember this case? This was the case of Reuven and Shimon are side-by-side neighbors. They have a wall. The wall falls down. They rebuilt the wall. So now Reuven claims that he laid out all of the money and Shimon has not paid him back. So the Mishnah paskins that no, the chazaka is that Shimon paid his part of the wall, and if Reuven wants to prove that he didn't, that's on Reuven. So the Gemara says, Hey Chidami, what's the case? If we're talking about a case where Reuven claimed 50% of the cost from Shimon after the project was complete, and ultimately Shimon claimed, I paid you, and I paid you on time, then Pshita. Then we'll say, of course, Shimon should be believed, and the burden of proof is upon Reuven. Rather, it must be that what's happening over here, that Shimon says to Reuven, I paid you, and I paid you early. Alma, what do you see from here? Afilu b'makom chazaka aminan ma li l'shaker. So we'll say, what do you see from here? That even in a case of chazaka, right? So even in a case where halacha l'maisa again, we have a chazaka that a person doesn't pay back his debt early. Aminan ma li l'shaker. We still say, why should he lie? Since he could have gone ahead and just simply said, I pay you back at the appointed time, right? And instead he had that claim, and that claim would have been believed. When he tells us that he paid back early, why not believe him? There's nothing to be lost. There's nothing to be lost in that claim. In other words, we'll say, you hear what's happening over here? On one hand, just to clarify this again, we have two competing things here. What are the two competing things? Number one, a chazaka. What's the chazaka? The truth is, there are really two chazakas at play over here. One chazaka is that people pay back their debts on time. The other chazaka is that what? People do not pay early. So now, what's interesting over here is like this. Now, the complicated piece in the case that we're dealing with is, I'm coming late to collect the debt, right? In other words, the debt was due on the 25th of Sivan. I'm not showing up to Rosh Chodesh Tammuz to collect the debt. I'm saying, Reuven, give me my money. Reuven says, I paid, and I paid early. Now, the whole chap over here is, Reuven could have just said, I paid. And if he would have said, I paid, then what? Then Allah wants to be believed. Now again, we'll say, obviously, as Rashi pointed out over here, there's a shvuah, there's other stuff in there. So when we say he's believed, he's believed to trigger a process that ultimately, again, results in the resolution of this issue. But the way he's believed. Now he throws in an additional piece of information, which is, and I paid you early. So here's the problem. That additional piece of information, we don't believe that piece of information, but yet at the same time, he didn't need to say that piece of information, right? And his claim would have been believed. So Shaila is b'makom chazaka, in a place you have a chazaka being that people don't pay their debt back early. But again, he could have just made a regular claim that he paid back his debt at the right time. Mali d'shaker, why should he lie? But there's a tremendous Moshe Haskell also, which is sometimes saying too much in life only puts you at a disadvantage. Right? There's a maila to keeping it simple, right? And there's a maila to ultimately saying as little as possible in life. We know this. We'll say, right? I think not a day goes by that I don't review my interactions and say, you know what? didn't need to say this, didn't need to say that, didn't need to engage like this. No, nothing bad. Well, some of this is bad, right? But lamaisa, just unnecessary. Unnecessary words, unnecessary interactions just cause complications. So it's incredible, right? In this case over here, all Reuven needed to say was, I paid you back. He didn't need to mention anything about paying back early. Okay, in any event, so Gemara tries to prove this on the Mishnah. So what do you see from the Mishnah? Alma, afilu b'makom chazaka min amar l'shaker. So what do you see from the Mishnah? You see from the Mishnah that even in a case of chazaka, we still say mali l'shaker. Why should he lie? Tush Gemara says, no. The Mishnah's case is not a good case. Why? Shiny hacha t'chol shafa v'shafa zmanehu. We'll say Mishnah's case doesn't work. Why? We saw this yesterday's daf. Because we'll say the way it works by making a wall is that every layer of bricks is considered to be the time for payment. Right? In other words, the way it works, and again, I guess this was like a societal thing. The way it works with the wall is, it's not the pshat that payment is due upon the completion of the wall. Every row of bricks represents a unit of completion, and therefore every single row of bricks is a time for payment. So therefore, I'll say essentially what the Gemara is answering is there's no such thing as early payment for a wall, right? Because every stage of the wall is a time that is ripe for payment itself. Okay, so Tashma, so back to the Mishnah, order to learn the Mishnah, that if, remember again, the wall fell down, they're going ahead and they're rebuilding the wall. So the obligation to rebuild the wall is up to Dalet Amos. From Dalet Amos and on, you can't, neither party could compel the other. So let's say Reuven decided to build from 4 amos to 10 amos. And now again, remember at that point, so Shimon can't be obligated to pay. Now we'll say, now remember again, what was the case in the Mishnah? Shimon erects a parallel wall, right, to the partnership wall, right? And he's ready to build the whole pergola, whole sukkah, whole thing. So then what do we do at that point? You want the wall. So because you want the wall, what do? We impose upon it 50% of the wall addition. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Samach Midal Lamos, Imachayv also, Samach Lokosa Acher, now Shimon goes in and erects a parallel wall, so then we go ahead and impose upon him the value, half of the value of the wall addition. Achiyavi Raya, Shenasan, and I will say, what's the halacha? The halacha is that we assume that Shimon has not paid his portion of the additional amount. So therefore, if Reuven comes to Shimon and says, Shimon, you owe me now 50% of the wall addition, and Shimon claims, no, I don't, the burden of proof is upon Shimon to prove that he has paid. That's the case. That's the case in the Mishnah. So where it says, hey chidami, well, what's the case? If we're talking about a case where Reuven claimed the money, is claiming the money from Shimon after the time that the debt is due, or at the time that the debt is due, after the time that the debt is due, and Shimon is claiming, I paid on time, then why wouldn't Shimon be believed? Rather, we must be talking about a case of where Shimon is saying, I paid, and I paid you early. Not only did I pay my 50% of the partnership wall addition, but I paid you early. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Alma b'makom chazaka lo amrinon mali l'shaker. So we'll say, see from here that even b'makom chazaka, even in a situation where there's a chazaka, the chazaka being what? The chazaka being that people don't pay early, we say mali l'shaker. Why would he lie? Why would he lie? In other words, since Shimon could have just as easily made, it's like amigo, right? Mali l'shaker, since he could have just made the claim, I paid, he doesn't have to say I paid on time. He would have been believed with an easier claim. And I will say, by the way, it's not even a lie. Saying I paid, you can interpret that however you want. The fact that he chooses to qualify with I paid early, why should that at all erode his claim? So the Gemara says, Shiny Hachan, no, this is not a good case. The Amar, Miyemar de Mechayvin li Rabbanan. But it's something we saw yesterday. This case is a little bit different. Why? Because in the case of the partnership wall, the addition to the partnership wall, it's not pashit. It's not pashit that Shimon is going to ever be liable to pay for that additional amount. So because of that, he says, who says I'm ever going to be made chayiv to pay? And therefore, because of that, he should be believed. Okay. So we'll say, so remember again, so therefore our core question is still outstanding, right? So remember again, let's refocus on our case. I lent Reuben $1,000 to be payable for a year, to be payable on the 25th of Sivan. I don't come to claim it until Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. I'm claiming it already after the due date. I come to Reuven says, I paid you. Not only did I pay you, but what? I paid you early. is Ruvain believed in such a case like this? The way we frame this question is, b'makom chazaka, do we say mali l'shaker? In a case where there's a chazaka being that people don't pay their debts on time, since Ruvain could have said, anyway, I just paid you on time, you didn't have to say I paid you early, do we say mali l'shaker? Why? What benefit does he have in lying? And therefore we should believe him in this particular case. Okay, so that's still our overarching shaila. Tashma, let's analyze this. So it's an interesting case over here. I go over to Ruvain. I say, Ruvain, you owe me $1,000. And Ruvain says, yep, I do. Okay, so the Gemara says, L'machar amar lo t'neoli. The next day, I go over and I say to Ruvain, pay him back. So what happens? Amar nesativ l'cha. So, im amar nesativ l'cha, if Ruvain said, I paid you already, so pater, then ultimately again he is pater. So the Gemara says, ein l'cha biyadi chayiv. But if Ruvain says, I don't owe you anything, then ultimately again he is chayiv. Okay, so what's going on over here? What's going on over here? So first we'll take a look at Rashi. Actually, not yet. So my love, nasati lecha, damali praticha bizmani. So let's analyze this. So okay, it's a case. I go over to Ruvain you owe me $1,000. I go over to him on Monday. Ruvain, you owe me $1,000. Ruvain says, yeah, I'm moda. I go over to Tuesday, I go on Tuesday to collect. So two possibilities, right? Possibility one is if Ruvain says, I paid you, then he's pater. If he said, ein lecha biyadi, there's nothing of yours in my hand, then he is chayiv. So let's break down these two cases. My lav nasati lecha. What's the case of where Ruvain says, I gave it to you, that he's pater? What is that case? Darmalei praticha bizmani. That case sounds like, what is Ruvain saying? I paid you on time. In other words, what's on time? So apparently on time is sometime between yesterday and today. I paid you on time, and therefore he's believed. Ein lecha biyadi, when Ruvain says you have nothing in my hands, maybe that's the case. The amarlei prasicha b'soch zmani. I went ahead and I paid you early. Vikatani chayiv. And ultimately, in that case, he's chayiv. So that's the thing Gemara is choosing to kind of align the cases. When he says, praticha, I paid you back, that means I paid you back on time. When he says, ein lecha biyadi, the Gemara is suggesting that means I paid you back early. And what does the Brisa say about when I paid you back early? That Ruvain is chayiv. Therefore, what do you see from here? Alma b'makom chazaka lo amrinan mali l'shaker. So therefore, I'll say, what do you see from here? Where there is a chazaka, we do not say what benefit does a person have in lying. So just to play this out, what that means is where there is a chazaka. Again, I will say, what's the chazaka? People don't pay back their debts early. So when we have a chazaka, essentially there's no migo, there's nothing. In other words, all we have is the chazaka. So you're telling me you paid me back early? You're a liar. And once you're a liar, that is going to generate liability. That's it. So the Gemara says no. So the Gemara says that's actually not the case. So which is low. My in l'chabiyadi. So I'll say, so no, let's go back for just a second. What does it mean so remember, let's play out the case again. I go over to Ruvain and I say, on Sunday, I say, Ruvain, you owe me $1,000. Ruvain says, yep, I do. I go back on Monday. Ruvain says, in l'chabiyadi, there is nothing of yours in my hands. What does that mean? Lo hayu dvarim me'olam. So I'll say, Ruvain is saying, you know what? I thought about it. It never happened. Never happened. I will say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi is actually all the way on top. The first wide line, Lo hayu dvar me'olam. Rashi says, Hilchach chay. So actually, before we get to Rashi, I'm sorry. Finish the rest of the Gemara. So Lo hayu dvar me'olam. Damar mar kol omer lo levisi ki omer lo parati dami. Because we'll say, as it is said, a person who says, I did not borrow, is as if he said, I did not pay back. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting about this case over here. This is quite fascinating. So remember, I'm going over to Ruvain on Sunday. I said, Ruvain, you owe me $1,000. Ruvain says, yes. I go back on Monday, and Ruvain says, Ein lecha biyadi klum. There is nothing of yours in my hands. So the Gemara says, Ruvain's chayiv. Why? Because we'll say, here's what's interesting. It obviously is not going to work. He admitted that he owed me the debt yesterday. That the statement of there is nothing of yours in my hand, which essentially means, it sounds like he's saying, I never borrowed from you anything. The Gemara says, a statement of I never borrowed is the equivalent of what? that I've never paid back. So because he says I've never paid back, therefore again he is chayiv to go ahead and pay me. That's the case over here. Nothing to do with the aforementioned machlokes. Take a look at Rashi. Lo hayu dvar me'olam. Rashi says hilchach chayiv l'shalim shari yesh edim shehoda lo b'fneihem v'chevan da'amar lo livisi moda hu shelo para. So we must be talking about a case over here where when I came over to Reuven on Sunday to go ahead and ask him about my debt, I did it in front of witnesses. So now on Sunday, Reuven was moda that he owes me money. So I come back on Monday and he says, "Ein l'cha biyadi klum." There's nothing of yours in my hand. The way we interpret that statement, is Reuven is being moda that he never paid me back. Okay, finish that Rashi. Since Reuven is now saying on Monday they never borrowed, he's admitting they never paid back. Obviously, if you're saying you never borrowed, that means you also never paid back. Fine. So we'll say, that's what's coming out. So therefore the Gemara essentially says this case is totally different. This case is totally different, and therefore, again, not really a raya. So we'll say, so this is where the sugya ends. So how do we pass in this case? So essentially, the Gemara really doesn't come to a resolution. So here's what we know. What we know is there's a chazaka. What's the chazaka? And we already saw this yesterday because the Gemara already said in yesterday's daf that we pass like Reish Lakish, Hilchas Reish Lakish, which is, what's the chazaka, Abosai? People don't pay back their debts early. And therefore, in halacha, when someone makes a claim that I paid back a debt early, we do not believe them. That claim is not believed. Now, the outstanding machlokes is, do we say b'makom chazaka mali l'shaker? So in the case I will say where essentially again a person could have easily made a different taina, just saying I paid back, but instead they said I paid back early. So ultimately again, do we say since they could have easily made an easier claim, but they chose to make this claim that halacha l'maisa they clearly should be believed? So that machlokes still seems to remain outstanding. The Gemara doesn't resolve that. I'll just point out, it's not unique over here. This concept of b'makom chazaka, arminan or lo arminan mali l'shaker, is a concept that applies throughout Shas. You have a number of different cases like this, where I have a chazaka, but then I also have like a migo. So the shaila is which one wins out? That tension still seems to remain. Okay. So we're not coming to a definitive conclusion by this particular piece. Let's go right there. So the Gemara says, "Samach lo kosa acha megalgal avasakol." So we'll say this is interesting. So remember this case in the Mishnah. So remember again, same case, shared chutzner. Reuven and Shimon have a partnership wall. The partnership wall fell down. Now they're rebuilding it. Reuven says, Shimon, let's just make it a 10 amma wall. Shimon says, I don't need 10 ammas. I'm perfectly happy with 4 ammas. You want to do the rest? Go for it. So therefore, what happens? So for the first 4 ammas, they build it jointly. From 4 through 10. So Reuven goes at it on his own. Reuven's on his own. Fine. So Reuven's building it. Shimon's giving him reshus to do so. So he's doing it. But Shimon's not sharing it in it financially. Then what happens? Shimon erects a parallel wall to the 10 amma partnership wall. And now we see Shimon's getting ready to go ahead and make something nice in his chaser. He's going to roof it. He's going to do all these things. So in that moment, what do? Megalgal. We say, okay, Shimon, clearly you want the taller partnership wall. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, we are going to go ahead and impose on you the extra cost now of the wall from Amma 4 through 10. Good. Fine. I shouldn't say that. We're going to make you share in the cost of the wall. So okay, here we go. Says the Gemara. Amrafuna, samuch lepalga, samuch lekula. So we'll say. So now, the way we've been setting up the case in the Mishnah is that the parallel wall completely mirrors the enhanced partnership wall, right? So for example, the enhanced partnership wall was 10 ammas, and now Shimon builds a 10 amma wall. Let's say it's not like that. Let's say again, the partnership wall is 10 ammas, but Shimon only builds a parallel 6 amma wall. 6 amma wall. So in other words, he's taking advantage of 2 ammas of the additional height of the partnership wall. So now, when the Mishnah says megalgalin alav, that's we make Shimon pay for the additional part of the partnership wall. Essentially, what's the machlokes? Do we only make him pay for the additional part that he's using, or we make him pay for the entire addition of the partnership wall. That's the machlokes. So Rav Huna says, samach lapalga, samach lakula. So Rav Huna says that once you use any part of the additional partnership wall, we make you chayiv for 50% of the entire addition of the wall. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, samach lapalga, shelo haya kosel chadash aruch kosel arishon. Let's say Shimon's parallel wall is not as tall as the entirety of the new partnership wall. So the Gemara says, Ella bechetzyav o begovo lo agia legovo shorishon. Supposed to hear what's happening over here? The enhanced partnership wall is 10 amos. Shimon's partnership wall is only 6 amos. So remember again, the first 4, there's nothing to talk about, right? Because remember again, they already both jointly did that. Now Shimon's taking advantage of an additional 2 amos of height of the new wall. So Rav Huna says, so samach lapalga, even if Shimon's parallel wall is only taking advantage of a little bit of the additional height, samach lakula. Rashi says, chayiv litin lo chelko bekosel arishon kilo samach kosel sheni kineged kol arishon. Techevan dehischil sofo ligmar v'yitin tikra v'utnan afa pishlo nosan as alav as a tikra nosim yad. So say Rav Huna says, once you use part of the addition, then what? You are obligated to pay 50% of the entire addition. Now, what's Rav Huna's logic? This is interesting. Rav Huna says, because it's only a matter of time until Shimon takes advantage of the full height of the partnership wall. In other words, okay, so right now he's built a parallel wall, 6 amos. At some point he's going to extend it. Why? Because we'll say, where does the real benefit of the parallel wall lie? Where does it really, right? When it has the same height as the partnership wall, because then you could roof it. Right? Then once you could roof it, this becomes really like a domicile space. So the Rav Huna feels ultimately Shimon is going to extend that partnership wall, and therefore, he's going to extend his parallel wall, and therefore, let's make him responsible for 50% of the entire addition. That's Rav Huna. Rav Nachman says, no. Lemai de samach samach, lemai de lo samach lo samach. Rav Nachman says, no, that's not the case. We make him liable for what? For the amount that you use. That's all. You're only liable for the amount that you use, the amount that you don't use. Therefore, in this case over here, Shimon built a 6 amma parallel wall. Therefore, Allah is taking advantage of 2 ammas of additional height. That's what he's chayiv for. That's what he's chayiv for. That and nothing else. So we'll say fundamentally, so this in Machlokes. Here we go. It's very interesting. Umodeh Rav Huna bekarnaval ufsa. Rav Huna will agree in the case of karnaval ufsa. What's karnaval ufsa? Look at Rashi. Umodeh Rav Huna bekarnaval ufsa bechibor shevekeren zavis lufsa chibor shahari shahaya sof beso shal Ruvain davok lekosel zeh shebein shtei chatzeros ula achar zman nimlach Ruvain zeh vechibor binyan muat bekeren zavis shal sof beso obelitas habinyan meshucha kineged. So we'll say, watch this. So Rav Huna will agree in the following case. So we'll say, imagine, I have to switch around. Rashi using different names. Let's say Shimon, right? We put it that Ruvain built the additional height of the partnership wall. Let's say Shimon will say his home is next to the wall. So what does he do? He builds out essentially an addition from his house to the partnership wall. So imagine for a moment if he builds out his house to the 6 amma height of the partnership wall, taking advantage of 2 additional ammas of height. In that case, Rav Huna will agree that Allah Chalamaisa, all Shimon has to pay for is what? 2 additional ammas of the wall. Because it will say, since he is creating a defined addition, right? He's building off a corner of his house. Remember, it will say, what's Rav Huna's logic for making Shimon liable in the entire addition of the wall? What's his logic? That over time Shimon's going to build up the wall. So essentially what the Gemara is answering over here is, if Shimon builds in a way where it's clear that this is a limited act of building, we only make him chayiv for what he's used. So if he extends his house, he does an addition from the corner, right? He builds out the corner of his house to essentially attach his house to the wall. So that's a defined addition. He's not going to go higher than that, presumably. And therefore, Allah Chalmais, we only make him chayiv for what he's going to pay. So even Rav Huna would agree in that case. Similarly, Umod Rav Nachman ba'afriza v'kivasa dikshuri. Look at Rashi. Mod Rav Nachman be'afriza ve'akvui dikshu. What does this mean? Linyan gova dekam Rav Nachman delemai de lo samach lo samach. Modehu shim asa bekosa shesamach mokom anochas rashi koros aliyah al pnei kula sofo lag bia od kishir goa. So this is interesting. So Rav Nachman will agree. Now remember, Rav Nachman normally says you only pay for what you're using. He would agree with us in the following case. If you go ahead and Shimon starts building next to the wall, and he starts inserting essentially cross beams and larger beams, which indicate that what? He's building higher. He's going to build higher. Then even Rav Nachman would agree that halacha l'maisa, he pays for the entire. He pays 50%. His 50% for the entire addition of the wall. Okay, so we'll say so again. So halacha l'maisa, what we are left with over here is, in this case, so again, in the classic case in the Mishnah, Reuven builds the addition to the partnership wall on his own because Shimon didn't want it. Shimon builds a parallel wall. In the Mishnah's case, Shimon's parallel wall is the exact same height as the addition of the partnership wall. So that's Pasha. So then the halacha is Shimon's got to pay his 50% of the entire addition. What happens, says the Gemara, if Shimon's parallel wall is not the same height? It only takes it right, the height of the partnership wall is 10 amas. Shimon only builds a parallel wall that is 6 amas. So essentially he's taking advantage of 2 additional amas of height. What does he have to pay? Rav Huna, everything, because we know he's ultimately going to use the rest of it. Rav Nachman, only pay what you use. And the Gemara just points out there are unique cases where each of them will agree with the position of the other. Okay, good. Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Bei kavi lo havi chazaka. So the Gemara says, look at Rashi. Bei kavi lo havi chazaka. What does that mean? Shimon sheik bia kosala cholik b'chasel mala midal amas ve'asa ba chalonos litzad Ruvain lahanachas roshe koros kimoshe perashti lo havi chazaka legabe Ruvain lemar ani siyaticha lagbia shelu l'shisiyaticha lo haya ose li hanachas roshe koros. So I will say this is very interesting. So let's say halacha ma'aseh in the following case. Good. I'm sorry. Did I just skip over here? Yeah. So now this is actually very interesting. So let's say Reuven is going ahead and he is building additional height on the partnership wall. So he does something interesting. What does he do? He puts, I don't know what the right technical term for it is, but it's like sockets. Sockets, they call it windows, but it's really sockets on Shimon's side of the wall. So this way, again, so if you can imagine, so again, same case, Reuven and Shimon are partners in the Chatzar. Wall falls down, they're rebuilding the wall. Reuven wants to go to 10 amas, Shimon's only interested in 4 amas. So fine, Reuven builds the additional 6 amas. What Reuven does on Shimon's side of the wall is he puts in sockets that are capable of receiving beams. Right? So this way, again, should Shimon ever want to go ahead and build an addition or do something, ultimately, again, he could do it. So the Gemara says, the building of those sockets is not a chazaka that Shimon paid any part of the wall addition. Right? The Gemara says, "Va'afa gav da'avalei himleti da'amar amina lichipayastali lo lisra shisai." So we'll say, so remember again, if you're Shimon, this is a great claim. You can say, obviously, I paid my 50%. Had I not paid my 50% of the wall addition, then what? Then why would Reuven have sockets installed on my roof? We'll say it's not a raya or on my wall. Why? Because we'll say Reuven can say like this: Shimon, we both know how the story is going to end. You're going to use the wall. You're going to have to be using the wall, right? Because why not? Why not take advantage of a large wall that's right in your property? And what's going to happen? When you wake up one day and decide you want to use the wall, you're going to pay me the 50%, and then what? And then we're going to have to figure out how to put in sockets. So instead, I know where this is going to end, and I proactively put in the sockets this way. When you wake up and decide that you want to use the wall, all you need to do is pay me 50% of the addition, Shalom al Yisrael, and we don't have to bring in the engineers to figure out how to put in the wall after, or how to put in the sockets afterwards. Fascinating. Abraham Nachman, Achzik lahardi, lo achzik l'kshuri. Okay, so what I say? So now, transition just a little bit over here to a little bit of a different type of discussion, which is actually quite interesting. What Shabbos say is different types of usage in a chatzar. When you have neighbors, look at Rashi just a moment. Achzik lahardi, it's 2, 4, 5 lines in the wide lines. So kol chazakos halal dishmaitin, einon chazakos Shalosh shanim. So we'll say, so now We're talking about when you have neighbors, or even people in the same chutzner itself, right? People who share a chutzner. But let's say again, everybody has their own demarcated part of the chutzner. It is natural for there to be certain usages that neighbors have of each other's property. So the Gemara is going to talk about over here that when you have a chazaka to use your property that impacts your neighbor in a certain way, it only allows you to use it in that defined way and not in another way. Rashi is just pointing out over here that these chazakas that we're talking about are a little bit different. Normally when we speak about a chazaka is established when? Over 3 years. Over 3 years. These chazakas are not 3-year chazakas. These types of chazakas, ultimately, again, are types of chazakas that are really established instantaneously, because again, they're the type of usage that if I wasn't allowed to do it, my neighbor would say, hey, stop that. And they would say it immediately and not wait. So Rashi says over here, Kol chazakos halal d'shmaitin einan chazako shalosh shanim, lo shayach shalosh shanim ela gabe cheskas karka, shemachzik b'sadi chaver va'omer lekach tia mimcha. Aval hacha becheskas tashmishin ba'alma mayri, b'mishtamish b'shel chavero. We're talking about over here about say certain that when I'm living next to someone, there's certain usages I have of their property, or for that matter, I'm in the same chutzner as someone. There's certain usages that chutzner neighbors have from each other's chatzeros. And one moment when I'm using it this way, and my neighbor sees I'm using it this way, and they don't say anything, that's indicative of chazaka. So now, let's take a look at Rashi. It's very interesting over here. Sorry, take a look at the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yosef Amar, achzik lehordi, achzik l'kshure. So we'll say, so Rashi, now, you can look, achzik lehordi, Rashi says, we'll say, go, it's about 6 lines up from the bottom. Achzik lehordi, laniach rashi rihitim, dikim al kosa chavero. So we'll say, if let's say my friend has a wall, and I have beams, light, small beams, that I put on top of that wall. Right, my neighbor's Ruvain, so I used the top of Ruvain's walls to put beams. Right, I have another wall. We'll say again, independent of our partnership wall discussion right now. Right. So Ruvain has a wall. He's my neighbor. So I have another wall. So I like to. Simple case. I put up my sukkah. Actually, we're going to see the sukkah case later on. But no, I'm building a shed, and I just have just the small beams that create the wood for the shed, and I use the top of Ruvain's wall. Right. So the halacha is, and I have a chazaka for that. Now, what's my chazaka for that? I do it in front of Ruvain, and Ruvain never said anything. That means Ruvain's good with it. Obviously, better to ask permission first. Right? But Lamaisa, technically, if I do it in front of Ruvain and Ruvain doesn't say anything, he's granting me the ability to use that. So that permission only extends to what? To light beams. What doesn't it extend to? Heavier beams, big beams. Shuriya big beams. So the Gemara says, so good. So obviously, if you have a chazaka to use it for big beams, then of course you could use it for small beams. Rav Yosef Rav Yosef feels it's actually interesting. Rav Yosef's logic is that halacha l'maisa, once you have rishos, you have rishos. Big beams, small beams, doesn't make a difference. Once you have the ability to use Ruvain's top of the wall and he's not objecting to your usage, people really don't care if you're using the top of their wall for big beams or for small beams. Okay? Others say, Amar Nachman, achzik lahordi, achzik l'kshuri, achzik lahordi. Others say, Rav Nachman said that once you have the right to use it for small beams, you can use it for big beams. And certainly again, for big beams, you can use it for small beams. Rav Nachman similarly said, achzik l'natfi, achzik l'shafchi. Now I will say, this is fascinating. So I will say, if you have a chazaka to use someone's property, l'natfi. What's natfi? Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, achzik l'natfi, achzik l'shafchi. Rashi says, haiselo chazaka b'chatzer chaver she'taftef gago megisham l'socho, al kol pnei orech gago below marzev. So I will say, listen to this. Let's say you have a chazaka to sheet water onto your neighbor's property. So we'll say, now, the way this is going to work is, you have gutters, but the way that works with your gutters is your gutters often overflow. So the water overflows from all of the gutters. So let's say, imagine there's just like a line of gutter, right? One big gutter between myself and Ruvain. And the gutter drips onto Ruvain's property. And again, Ruvain's wrong with it. It's chazaka. So we'll say, if you have a chazaka for that, you could also go ahead and, so we'll say, so now let's say, I decide to redo my gutter system. So instead now of the entire length of the gutter dripping water onto Reuven's field, instead what I'm going to do is I attach like a pipe, and the water is all going to flow out, to sheet out onto Reuven's property, but just in one spot. So instead of the entire length of the gutter, just on one spot. Rav Nachman says that works. See, Rabbi say, here's what's interesting. In the eyes of halacha, it is much more advantageous to sheet water in one spot than over an extended area. Because again, an extended area, it makes it difficult to use that area. It makes it difficult for Reuven to use that area. If it's just flowing into Reuven's field in one spot, okay, so that one spot is going to be impacted, but the rest of the field is absolutely fine. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, so achsik l'shafchi lo achsik l'ntufei. But if you have a chazaka to go ahead and sheet water in one spot, you can't switch over to a gutter system. Rabbi Yossi says, no, afilu achsik l'shafchi achsik l'natfi. Rabbi Yossi says, either way is fine. Ikedan was an alternate version of this. Amar Rav Nachman, achsik l'shafchi achsik l'natfi. If you have a chazaka, ultimately again, for shafchi, for gutters, you could certainly go ahead and sheet in one spot. L'natfi achsik l'shafchi. Aval, l'tzrifa de'orbani lo. So I'll say, what can't you do? So this is actually an interesting case. If you have a hut that has a roof made of willow branches, so that you can't have that water sheet onto Reuven's field. So apparently, again, that's a much more concentrated form of moisture, or a concentrated, consolidated moisture or water, and that really negatively impacts Reuven's ability to use his field at all. Okay, so Rabbi Yosef Amar afilu tzrifa de'orbani. Rabbi Yosef says no, even the water coming off of the roof of a willow hut. Okay, or I should say the willow roof of a hut. So Avad Rabbi Yosef uvda b'tzrifa de'orbani. Rabbi Yosef passed him this way and allowed again one neighbor to go ahead and sheet water off of his willow roof of his hut. Okay. So I'll say, so again, just really interesting ideas over here. Now again, obviously I will say, if Reuven says to me, Silber, you can't do that. What is that? You can't put your beam on top of my wall. You can't sheet water onto my property. If he says that, he has a right to say that. We're dealing with cases over here where I have the reshus to do it. The shaila is, once you have the reshus to do one thing, how does that translate into other things? Good. So it's an interesting case over here. I rent a house to my friend. Amud Beis. So the Gemara says, Babira Gidola. So we'll say, so now watch this. Essentially, I rent Reuven. I own a building. I go ahead and I rent Reuven an apartment inside of the building. So we'll say, this is very interesting. So now the shaila is going to come up with what areas of the building complex does Reuven have rights in? So the Gemara says, Mishtaymish Beziza ubikasla ad dalaramas ubaoviakosa makom shinagu. So we'll say, so again, now let's say there's a wall, right? There's a wall in the chutzner. So Reuven could use the wall, he could use the protrusions of the wall up until Dalet Amas of height, and he could use the width of the wall in a place where they conducted themselves this way. So I will say, so essentially really what the Gemara is saying over here is that halacha l'maisa, so there are certain common areas, and Reuven has the right to use those common areas, including the wall itself, right, the wall of the chutzner over there, up to a height of Dalet Amas, the thickness of the wall, the protrusions of the wall. Aval b'tarbis apad nolo. So I'll say, so apparently again, if I the owner of the building have like a reception area, hall area that had a beautiful garden, so the residents of the apartment don't automatically get the rights to the use of that garden. So in other words, we'll say now, obviously so much of this is just going to be dependent on minhag hamakom, right? But what it's saying over here is that apartment rental doesn't automatically give you rights to all of the amenities on the property. So again, if I happen to have a hall, a reception hall, and there's a beautiful garden there, the renters don't automatically get use of that garden. Rav Nachman says, no, the renters do get use of the garden. But the backyard, right, the area behind the apartment building, that they don't get. The Rava says, no, they can even use the backyard. So fine. So we'll say, so therefore again, what do you see from here? Machlokes, interesting discussion about when you rent a property, when you rent an apartment inside of a bigger building, what amenities do you have access to? That's the shaila, and they'll say so much of this is going to be dependent on minhag hamakom. Okay, Ravina, hay kshur demitlasa at klasin Yomi lahavi chazaka. All right, so we'll say, so what? So says the Gemara. Look at Rashi. Lo havi chazaka im simcha al kosel chavero v'lo micha b'soch shloshim. Lo havi chazaka liton v'lomar piasticha b'maos adolum d'chol tlasin yom lo kapet inish v'lo machi savar chaveri zet sarch l'tzel yomim mu'atim yet lena misham. So we'll say, this is very interesting. So if let's say Reuven has a wall, and I went ahead and I put a beam on that wall. So we'll say, so Reuven doesn't object. If Reuven doesn't object for within the first 30 days, so that's not called the chazaka. That's not called the chazaka. Basra tlasin yom and have a chazaka. If after 30, because we'll say why? Within 30 days, it's common for neighbors to kind of, give a little bit to each other. If after 30 days, my beam is still there and Reuven says nothing, that means that what? Have a chazaka. That means I have a chazaka. Rabbi said, what does it mean I have a chazaka? What's the chazaka? What's the chazaka? That I am allowed to use the top of Reuven's wall. That's the chazaka. Okay, so what's interesting, what Ravina essentially is really focusing on over here is when neighbors use your property, failure to object immediately does not necessarily mean acquiescence. Now, this, just to understand, we have two different cases. Case we saw before, let's say there could be certain cases where failure to object immediately could represent chazaka, but other cases where ultimately Ravina is saying, let's say this case, I put my beam on the top of his wall, so he doesn't have to object immediately in order for me to not to establish chazaka. He has 30 days, but if after 30 days he still doesn't say anything, then clearly he's acquiescing to this usage. The sukkah de mitzvah. I will say, what if it's a sukkah? This actually is a great case. So let's imagine again, Reuven is my neighbor. Reuven has a wall. I use his wall to support my schach. He sees that I'm using his wall. So what's the halacha? I will say, in this kind of case, if it's a sukkah de mitzvah, he has 7 days to object, right? He has 7 days to object. So the Gemara says, V'i sukkah de mitzvah, he ad shiva yomin, lo havi chazaka. Basra shiva yomin havi chazaka. So during Sukkot, it's not a chazaka. Why? Because we assume, okay, Reuven's doing me a tova. He's doing me a favor and letting me go ahead and keep my sukkah up. If after 7 days go by and he still allows me to keep the sukkah up, then naturally that he's allowing me to use the property. Now we'll say, if I put a beam on top of Reuven's wall, and what? I cement it in, and Reuven doesn't say anything, that's a pretty solid chazaka. Right? So let me say again, clearly then he's allowing me to use it. Abai says as follows. A very interesting case here. So we'll say this is a great case. Reuven and Shimon live on opposite sides, not opposite ends of the Rosh Hashanah. So we're supposed to just imagine for a second. Let's assume for a moment that you have a street, right? That street is called the Rosh Hashanah. Reuven lives on one side of the street, and Shimon lives on the other side of the street, right? So their homes are literally right across from each other. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, so now the issue over here, we're back to Hezek Re'iyah. The issue is that they both have a roof. They both have a roof, and they both use their roofs. Their roofs are direct visual alignment. So Reuven can see out the Shimon's roof, Shimon can see out the Reuven's roof. So what's the halacha? Ze osa make lechatzi gago. Sorry. Ze osa make lechatzi gago. Ze osa make lechatzi gago. So we'll say this is interesting. Each one of them makes a make. Make literally means a fence, but a wall. Each one makes a wall for half of their roof. Right? Each one makes a wall for half of their roof. We'll say this is a sign for the general roof, general wall you have to make. Halacha l'maisa again for a rooftop. This is a Hezek Re'iyah wall. So they each have to make half of a Hezek Re'iyah wall on their respective roofs. Zeh shelo keneged zeh. And we'll say each of them makes a wall that doesn't correspond to the other. Uma'adif. So we'll say what that means is like this. Actually, it's fascinating. So we'll say, Reuven will make a Hezek Re'iyah wall for half of his roof, right? Like this. And Shimon, on the other side of the Rosh Hashanah, will make a wall for half of his roof. Rabbi say, on opposite sides. So therefore, it turns out that when you put them together, right, so really, neither Reuven nor Shimon could see into each other's property because effectively, both properties are blocked by a wall, but neither party has to make half of the wall, and ultimately, again, but the walls don't correspond to each other, the walls are opposite each other, right? So each one makes a half wall on the opposite side of the other, thereby creating a complete Hezek Re'iyah wall. Incredible. Now listen, obviously you don't want them each making 50% because then you can see on the side, right? So they each kind of, whatever, they each make 51%. Let's just call it that. So there's a little bit of an overlap, but neither is able to see into the property of the other. Brilliant. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, I don't understand why you're bringing this up in Rosh Hashanah. In other words, why are you setting this case up as a case where they live on across each other from Rosh Hashanah? I feel the nami. But say the truth is, even in Rosh Hashanah, right? This should be the same halacha. The Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why. Rosh Hashanah is strichale. You need Rosh Hashanah. What would you have thought? Name alei sof habayis let's say Rosh Hashanah. So I will say, you would have thought like this. We would have thought like this. The truth is, either way, Reuven and Shimon have to build a wall. Why? Because they want privacy from Rosh Hashanah. Right? And as we'll say, forget about the fact that they live opposite each other. They live right off Rosh Hashanah, busy thoroughfare. So I would have thought that should require that they would want to build a wall because of that. Kamashlan da Amarle, Rabim bi Yamama Chazili, Balayla lo Chazili. Because they can say to each other like this. For the rabbin, I don't need it. Why? Because for the rabbin, people are only out during the day. At night, no one sees me. So whatever I need to do that's more private on the rooftop, I'll do at night. But Reuven and Shimon can say to each other, listen, we see each other both by day and by night, because again, we're both going to be using our rooftops all the time. Inami, Rabbim ki ka'amina chazali, ki asivna lo chazali. Furthermore, again, the rabbim can only see me on my rooftop when I'm standing, but when I'm sitting, they can't see me. At chazisli ben ka'amina ben ki asivna. But you, right, Reuven and Shimon, say to each other, we could see each other whether we're sitting or standing. Rabbim kima ainu chazili, right? When the rabbim, they have to kind of look up or strain themselves to see me. Kiloma ainu lo chazili, but if they don't try to see me, they won't see me. At mamela nami chazisli, but you, right, opposite neighbor, you'll always see me. So I will say, so in other words, even though they both live opposite by the Rosh Hashanah, apparently you could get away without a privacy wall by Rosh Hashanah, because again, you'll just limit your use of your rooftop to times when the Rosh Hashanah won't see you. But halacha l'maisa, when you have a neighbor, right, when Reuven and Shimon live across each other from the Rosh Hashanah, and their rooftops align with each other, they're mamish able to see each other, and therefore they need this privacy wall. I will say, I thought about these lines. With this we'll conclude for today. But I thought these lines, there's something very beautiful about this. If you think about the use of the words Rabbim and At, maybe Rabbim refers to other people, and At refers to the Ribono Shalom. So look at this distinction I will say. Rabbim, bi'emama chazuli, belayla lo chazuli. Other people only see what you do by day, but they don't see what you do by night. At, the Ribono Shalom is able to see what I'm able to do, both by day and by night. Other people, Rabbim, right, are only able to see me when I stand up. They only see the things that I let them see. When I sit down, right, they don't see me. At HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees me whether I'm standing or I'm sitting. Other people only see me kima ainu, right, when they strain themselves to see me. In other words, people don't see a lot of the stuff that I do. HaKadosh Baruch Hu at memela nami chazisli. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you see me all the time. So, from people, we all put on a face, klape chutz, right? And we all go ahead and project a certain image. But the truth is, often we have parts of our personality, parts of our behaviors, things that we do in private, out of sight from people, thinking that as long as people can't see it, so then I'm safe. But it's always important that the Ribono Shel Olam is able to see us sitting or standing, day and night, and even the things that no one else knows about, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. And the knowledge that the Ribono Shel Olam is watching and with me at all times should ultimately be the motivation, Emirat Hashem, to push ourselves just a little bit further. I will say, Shkayach, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up Emirat with this continued conversation, this continued case tomorrow. Shkayach. All right, Chav Razum, have a great day, everyone.